But as soon as we see signs of a recession, it's very easy for these companies to they have some cover now to say, okay, we're implementing these austerity measures. We're saving money by laying off a bunch of people. They would have been happy to do it a year ago or 2 years ago. They couldn't have gotten away with it, so they're doing it now. So I don't really see these tech layoffs necessarily as an indication that any of these companies are in financial trouble. I think it's a good thing for the industry. I think it's good to kind of trim the fat and really focus on the bottom line. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily an indication of anything bad.
Welcome to the Bar Down Investing Show. Here are your hosts, Kyle Wilson and Jay Scott.
Hey there, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of the Bar Down Investing Show. I am Ashley Wilson's husband, also known as Kyle Wilson, and I'm here with my good buddy, Mr. Jay Scott. How's it going, Jay?
Everything is going great. So what's going on in the sports world? Is there something?
Oh boy, Eagles going to the Super Bowl. What a weekend. That was the craziest game I've ever watched. Like I didn't even know what was happening, but hey, we made it. So we're going there and playing the Chiefs, which I guess I could have predicted that going in, but they had a little dicey. Mahomes isn't 100%, so we'll see.
So let's hear the prediction. What's the prediction?
Prediction? 31-24 Eagles.
Okay, there it is. Heard it here first, everybody. Bet the line.
Yeah, so let's get on with the level 10. You got any wins this week?
I have no investments this week, but Tesla's doing well, up 50% since we recommended it back in our predictions.
Our prediction
episode.
already came true.
Our predictions already come true. I'm still holding. So I invested the next day and I'm still holding up 50%. But I guess the big thing in my professional life is your wife, Ashley Wilson, and I, we run a coaching course called Apartment Addicts, multifamily coaching. And just this week, we got voted the best multifamily coaching course by Apartment Owners Association of America and Rent Magazine. So,
oh boy,
pretty flattered. That's a huge honor, and we don't market it a whole lot, but thrilled about that. So that's kind of our professional win for the week.
That is a huge win. Can we follow that up with any good scorecard note?
Yeah. So we hit 1,000 downloads.
Whoa!
Total. Not just last episode, in total. That's okay though, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we're building up our audience. We're getting some great feedback, but 1,000 downloads on the show at this point.
Yeah, who would say where we would go if we actually started marketing this thing?
We're gonna find out.
Get on that. Great. Rock updates. Let's roll right into it. Since this is a sports theme, I'm going to roll with the sports. And even though we are playing the Chiefs, I have to give a shout out to Travis Kelce, just because he is Jason Kelce, who's one of my favorite players in the NFL, center for the Eagles. It's his brother. And after the win, he had an impromptu speech where he called out the mayor of Cincinnati for talking trash about the Chiefs, and he called him a jabroni. So the jabroni, for those of you who don't know, is a line from The Rock, who that was one of his insults back when he was a wrestler. He used to call people jabronis. So I thought that was a good shout out for The Rock there.
Okay, so we're going Rock adjacent this week.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get right into the headlines. Literally, as we pushed this taping back 2 hours just so we could see what the Fed did. Fed announced, as predicted, a 0.25% rate hike. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we didn't need to push it back. Everything kind of happened exactly as we expected. So we all knew that the 0.25% rate hike was coming. I think there was a 98.5% chance of that happening. That was kind of baked in. The big question was, what was Jerome Powell going to say? What were his comments going to be? And were they going to be kind of leading us to believe that the hikes are done, that we're still going? And it turns out that he was pretty neutral. So essentially, and I'll let you say what you think, but the way I read it was, Essentially, we think we're kind of starting to see the effects of rate hikes that were implemented 6, 9, 10 months ago, finally taking effect. It's kind of doing what it was supposed to do. And we're now kind of in wait and see mode. I would suspect that in March we'll see another quarter point hike. But assuming we don't get any surprising news like inflation through the roof or inflation through the floor or really bad job numbers or anything like that, we're probably in a holding pattern for as long as the economy is just kind of moving along.
Yeah, it's always it's so scripted what they release, and it's so cryptic, and I think by design so that you can kind of read it one way or another. But they did say that they anticipate ongoing hikes, so you're probably right with another quarter point coming up. I don't see them jumping back up to a half a point or anything above that unless there's something crazy happens. And they used words like until it's sufficiently restrictive to return to 2%, which is interesting because by certain measures, so the Fed likes to use the core PCE as their preferred measure of inflation. Well, the core PCE has been coming down to the point where December it was at 4.4. So it pegged core inflation at 4.4, down from 4.7 the month before and 5.1 the month before that. So if you actually look at it with core inflation at 4.4 and now our target rate at 4.75 for the first time, this is technically restrictive above what the inflation rate is.
Yeah, and all that said, I mean, I don't want to belabor this point, but keep in mind that 4.4 that we saw this in December and the 4.6 or whatever it was before, those are annual numbers. And so what we're actually seeing from a monthly standpoint is inflation really low. So month over month, inflation's really low, but we still have, when we look back a full year, we still have some big numbers from a year ago that are factored into that year average. So I think what we're seeing right now is inflation's in a really good point, a good place, and we may not. I wouldn't be surprised if the quarter point hike in March, if we see that, if that's kind of the end of it, and then we just kind of hold in a holding pattern until either the economy improves or we head into a recession.
Yeah, they definitely left the door open for that. They hinted that they believe that ongoing more hikes will be necessary, but they also left the door open by saying, using a lot of language about assessing the current market conditions and things like that for future hikes and whatnot. So they definitely left the door open, and the things that they called out were the labor market, inflation, and financial and international development. So they mentioned Ukraine in there too. So they obviously have a pulse on that. But once again, jobs. I think we might hit on that later. So let's move on to another headline where the White House is trying to get involved with landlord and tenant relationships now. They want to release a bill basically to help out renters with all of this rental increase.
Yeah, so basically the White House put out a proposal last week, a few days ago. I guess it was last week when this comes out, and essentially it was a proposal, and they laid out 5 points that they're kind of looking to drive around rentals and the rental market in the U.S., and everything from providing safe, quality, affordable housing to having clear and fair leases, enhancing renter rights, the right to organize, so the right for tenants to organize into like unions, and then some relief around evictions and standardizing the eviction process. On the face of it, I mean, I can't really argue with most of those things. My obvious concern, though, is that the government is going to be likely looking at this from the lens of the renter and not necessarily the lens of capitalism and the other side. And so I think if they were to implement common sense policies around each of those 5 points in the proposal, I have no problem with it. But I suspect, like the government typically does, that they're going to go to the wrong extreme, and we're going to see a lot of pushback, and who knows where this will go.
Yeah, the government has problems looking at downstream effects of what policies that they put in, what the effects are going to be later. The biggest, obviously, renter or landlords are hating this. Anytime the government gets involved, they don't feel like it's necessary. It's not really addressing the real problem. The real problem is just housing shortage. Like if there was an abundance of rentals for people to choose from, then it would kind of sort out itself. Let the free market, the cure for high prices is high prices, right? So I don't like that they're getting involved. As you said, the one thing that was notably missing, though, which was good, is rent control, which a lot of people were calling, hey, we need a national rent control. You still see it at some state levels, but that was missing. So as being in the landlord market, that I'll take that as kind of a little mini win that didn't even make it on the proposal, let alone get passed into law. So I don't think we need to dive in any farther into that. But there are quite a few things popping up about these tech companies. So Amazon's got some news about them. We got job layoffs, job cuts. What are your comments around those?
So as somebody who used to work in the tech sector, as somebody who used to be pretty senior at a couple of the big tech companies, including Microsoft, I've been through this process of layoffs during recessions. And my general take is, and what we typically see every recession in Silicon Valley in the tech world, is that tech companies use the first signs of a recession as an opportunity to kind of lay off the bottom 10% of performers in their companies. So whether it's 7% or 11 or 13, somewhere around 10% of the bottom performers. And I think the reason we see that is because tech companies go on hiring sprees during good times. They just bring in so many people. They realize that they've got a lot of underperformers, but they're really hesitant to start laying off those underperformers while the economy is good, because that looks bad to shareholders. Shareholders say, oh, Microsoft's doing layoffs or Google's doing layoffs. Something must be wrong with the company. But as soon as we see signs of a recession, it's very easy for these companies to they have some cover now to say, okay, we're implementing these austerity measures. We're saving money by laying off a bunch of people. They would have been happy to do it a year ago or 2 years ago. They couldn't have gotten away with it, so they're doing it now. So I don't really see these tech layoffs necessarily as an indication that any of these companies are in financial trouble. I think it's a good thing for the industry. I think it's good to kind of trim the fat and really focus on the bottom line. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily an indication of anything bad.
Well, you mentioned that is going into recessions, though, and it's a bit of a... The problem is in the news, you have two different narratives, right? You have constantly, you're just seeing all of these layoffs happening, and you're right, they're mainly in tech. But then you have all these government officials coming out and saying, hey, the job market is so strong right now. The resilience of the job market, how good the job market, we're adding this many jobs, unemployment's at its all-time low. But then you also have all these news cycles talking about all the layoffs that are happening. So it's a bit confusing. I don't know if maybe we can dive into that a little bit more for the issues list. Let's look next. I only got one more headline here about apparently you read an article talking about the Great Resignation was caused by COVID-19 housing boom. Why don't you elaborate on this? Because I didn't read into this one.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. So this relates back to the kind of the job market and the job reports that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. And everybody's kind of been talking about this idea of the labor participation rate, this LPR. And it's basically this metric that looks at the number of people that are looking for a job. So we've seen that unemployment over the last year and a half has been tremendously low. But at the same time, we've seen very few people, very relatively small amount of people that are actually looking for jobs. So the question has been since COVID started, where did all these people go? All these people that were either laid off or left their jobs because of COVID or whatever, are they not looking for a job now? We've surmised that maybe it's that they're working in the gig economy. Maybe they are, maybe they're retiring. Maybe they're living off the stimulus money that was sent to them a couple of years ago, and nobody really knew why all these people left the job force and never came back. Well, there was a paper that was published last week that basically examined this. And what they found is if you look at the labor participation rate today, you can break it into two pieces. Number one, you can look at the labor participation rate of prime year earners. So people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, people our age. And what we found is most of them are back to work. The labor participation rate for them is right back to where it was back in 2019. But the labor participation rate for older people is still really, really low. Not only that, but what they see is that the labor participation rate for older people is much lower in areas where housing saw a boom over the last couple of years. So basically what that's telling us is in places where we saw a big housing boom over the last couple of years, older people aren't going back to work. And the theory there is that older people are just living off of the equity they've built in their house. Maybe they're refinancing, maybe they're selling, whatever they're doing and downsizing. But to some degree, people older are seeing an opportunity to kind of retire, leave the workforce, and just live off the equity gains in their house or their property over the last couple of years. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting hypothesis, and going along that, I guess, I assume that data is trailing a little bit, and it was probably these people were, if you're talking about older generations retiring, they were probably looking at a pretty nice stock portfolio about a year ago, back when the S&P was 4,800. Well, now it's down, it's right around 4,000. It'll be interesting if some of those people have to maybe come back to work if their stocks aren't spewing off as much cash as they used to. Or why don't we, since this seems around jobs anyway, why don't we roll into the issues and just talk about jobs? Because once again, Powell comes out with a release saying that one of the number one indicators that they're looking at for whether or not to do rate hikes is the job resiliency. So why don't we dive into these numbers that they're using, whether they're the right numbers, what they should be leading us to believe, and whether we think that it's going to have any effect on where the economy goes.
Yeah, so it's a tough subject because there's so many different ways to slice the jobs data, and you can kind of read anything you want into it. The nice thing is, over the last 2 years since COVID, what we've seen is kind of a separation of historically consistent jobs data. Like we typically see the unemployment rate coincide with the labor participation rate, coincide with wage growth and temporary workers and all those things. And over the last 2 years, everything's kind of gone haywire, and numbers here don't seem to correlate with numbers over there, et cetera. But what we're starting to see now is a lot of these numbers coming back together. So the jobs data is starting to look similar in terms of trends and things like that as it did prior to COVID. So it's nice that like moving forward, we're able to look at the jobs data again in a way that makes sense to us. But right now we're still seeing a lot of really weird disparities in different parts of the job sector. And so number one is if you just look at the unemployment rate, so just number of people that aren't working, that want to be working, that are looking for jobs, it is historically low. We're at 3.5%, which is tied with the lowest it's ever been in history. But at the same time, we're seeing 100,000 layoffs in tech. At the same time, we're seeing temporary workers starting to get laid off. And typically that's a good leading indicator that we're heading into a recession. We're obviously seeing just what we discussed before, labor participation rate is really low, which tells us that there are a lot of people who have given up finding a job that just have left the labor force. And so all of these things are kind of contradictory to one another. And when you look at it all together, it's hard to say, does this mean things are getting better, things are staying the same, or things are getting worse? And nobody really knows.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big reasons why many people have a problem with them using this as an indication of the health of the economy. We've already thrown GDP out the window as the indicator of the health of the economy. If you average out over like the last year, the GDP growth about 1%, factoring we had a couple negatives in there, and then we've followed up with a couple positives. But as far as job numbers, we don't even know which job numbers we should be using. A lot of these surveys, like they're literally people just calling up and surveying job seekers surveying companies. There's two indexes. There's a household index and the what's the other one called? The established index, where literally what they do, the household, they just call up households and be like, hey, you working? Okay, great, check that off. And then the other ones, they call up businesses and be like, hey, how many people did you hire? Did you hire? Did you fire? What are you doing? And there's a huge disconnect between the two. One of the main reasons there's a huge disconnect is because households, they'll just say, are you working? Not how many jobs do you have? Versus when they call businesses, they just say, how many people did you hire? Well, that person that they called in the first time could have 2-3 jobs, and that's not factored into the establishment. That's just how many people are getting hired. It's not taking into consideration part-time jobs. It's just, are you working? So some people could be just taking on something part-time, looking for a full-time job, and that's not taken into consideration. It's not taken into consideration. People have given up. Like, they look for a job and they're just like, you know what? It's too hard. I can't find something that I want. I'm just going to sit on unemployment. Independent contractors, those people don't qualify for unemployment. So if you want to look at, if you're just taking how many people are on unemployment, independent contractors can't apply for unemployment. And if we talk about the tech sector, you see a lot in the news, Twitter's laying people off, Google's laying people off, all these different things. Well, they give them packages, right? Layoff packages. And I assume that all of these layoff packages put in them, okay, we're going to give you 3 months, 6 months severance pay, but you can't apply for unemployment. So these people aren't employed, but they're not hitting the unemployment. So there's just so many factors not considered in this. And the numbers, you mentioned gig economy too, like how are those numbers getting factored in? People working for Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, working for on Twitch, streaming, YouTube, all these different things. How are all these things getting factored in? And so in the lag in this, like this is what we are relying on. Basically, Powell using as his crutch that the economy is doing so well, and that kind of scares me.
Yeah. And so, well, let's look at some real data and kind of get an idea of where we are and where we're headed. In terms of where we are, obviously we have that 3.5% number, unemployment number. And then in terms of like number of jobs created, so back 5-6 months ago over the summer, we were seeing record high number of jobs being created, 500,000, 600,000 jobs in a month. And now we're down around 220,000.
Can I caveat one thing there though?
Absolutely.
Q2 last year, they said 1 million jobs were added. That was their initial report. Philly Fed last month came back, looked back, did the 9-month look back or 6-month, whatever look back, and they looked back at Q2 again, and they said, actually, we over predicted that a little bit. Now that we've dived into the numbers, it wasn't 1 million or 1.1, 1.2. It was 10,000. So they over-reported by 1 million jobs.
Yep.
So that's the kind of data we're dealing with when you're talking about adding jobs.
100%. And that plays a big role. And so we can take stuff on face value, but we have to realize that a lot of the data that we get is what's called advanced data, where they kind of give us a sneak peek of what they're going to be releasing once they finalize it. But like you said, in many cases, these sneak peeks are off in some cases by literally tens, hundreds, or in this case, almost 1 million people. But regardless, I think it's clear that we're still in historically low unemployment. At the same time, we're seeing 100,000 tech layoffs. So if we're seeing 100,000 tech layoffs, but we're still creating jobs, where are those new jobs coming from? It turns out they're coming from 3 industries. They're coming from construction, healthcare, and hospitality. And so we're seeing 3 industries that are doing tremendously well. Well, let's think about these 3 industries. Number 1, hospitality. As soon as we head towards a recession, as soon as things start tightening up and people don't have as much money to spend, hospitality is going to be the first sector that lays off.
Well, and that's probably why it's up so much now, because that happened during COVID.
Exactly. And same with construction. So as soon as we see a downturn in building, which we started to see in December was a really rough month for new construction in the housing sector. We're going to start seeing layoffs in the construction field. Healthcare is a little bit different. Healthcare is actually pretty recession resistant, even counter-cyclical with recession, like healthcare workers go up during recessions. But for the most part, a lot of the people that we see being hired right now, I think, are the people that are at biggest risk of losing their jobs first when the market starts to turn down. Now, in line with that is we have these things called temporary workers, or temporary help is the official data term. And we look at these people that come in and they help, like somebody brings them in for a few hours a week, or they come in seasonally, or they come in to whatever, temporary help, exactly what it sounds like. And a really good leading indicator of recessions over the last several recessions has been when the temporary help number has gone negative for a few straight months. Basically, we're laying off temporary help. Well, we just hit 3 months of negative temporary help data. And so this is a really good indicator that we may be pretty close to a recession, and we may start to see some stress in the jobs market over the near future, because a lot of businesses are starting to lay off those part-time helping employees that tend to be pretty low wage, pretty cheap to hire. They're laying them off. So that's number one. And then another interesting thing to look at that I noticed this week is we've been talking for the last year, and this goes the other direction. We've been talking for the last year about how real wages have been going down. So people have been getting 3, 4, 5% wage increases year over year, but inflation's been at 7, 8, 9%. So people are losing money in their paychecks every month, losing spending power. Well, we now have real wage growth. We've seen real wage growth. We have the 2022 numbers. We were at 4.6% in wage growth in 2022. We were also, for inflation, right around 4%, 5% inflation in 2022. So those things kind of evened out. And so what we're seeing is in 2022, where 6 months ago we were seeing really bad real wage growth numbers, people losing spending power, turns out that 2022 was actually, it wasn't great, but people didn't lose any spending power. They broke even between wage growth and inflation, and they had the same amount of spending power as they had at the end of 2021. So, I mean, and as long as inflation continues to stay down, we're going to start to see real wage growth again. So again, so many different factors leading in different directions. But overall, I think if I had to make a guess or a prediction, I would say that we're probably closer to a recession now than we have been in this entire last year.
And next month will be even closer, and you could say the same thing.
Yeah, well, so the interesting thing is there are some people who are talking about maybe we're not going to have one. I mean,
maybe we got that soft landing. I mean, so the chances of the soft landing, they surveyed, just a general survey of people believing whether a soft landing is going to happen. Last quarter, it was about 66% thought that we're having a recession. No, and now they survey the same people. It's only about half. So it's the likelihood is going down. My whole problem with the thing is just the lag effect of everything. And the whole, anybody who runs a company knows, we like to say, hey, let's slow to hire, quick to fire, but it's usually the other way around. People usually, I need help, so I hire somebody. But then it's such a long, drawn out process actually getting somebody on your payroll and setting them up. And, you know, I've had to do this a couple times to get people on the payroll, that it's a sticky thing. People don't want to just fire them right away after they've spent so long hiring them and training them and doing all this stuff. And there's that lag effect of, okay, people are going to hold on to employees longer than they probably should. And not only that, we just talked about how even when they lay them off, there might not be hitting unemployment right away because of the layoff packages and whatnot there. So there's the lag effect on that. And not only that, we discussed on a previous podcast how just the lag effect of, it's not until after the Fed has paused and then even started cutting that we usually even see this unemployment rate pop up. So for them to keep bringing this up as the indicator of how resilient the economy is, the jobs, well, the lag effect, like they're just kind of throwing that out the window. Yeah,
it's possible we've already, or we being the Fed, has already overcorrected. And 6 months from now, we could be in a big recession because the right place to kind of have held interest rates was maybe 3%. or 3.5% or 4%. Now we're close to 5%, and who knows? Maybe that's too much. Maybe the hike that we saw today, that quarter point hike today, was kind of the nail in the coffin. That 6 or 9 months from now, we're going to see a major slowdown that we didn't predict. What's the Fed going to do? They're going to overcorrect in the other direction, because historically that's what the Fed does. They overcorrect. So I don't think we know, and I know this feels like a very unsatisfying issues discussion, because we can't come to any consensus on where things are headed. But I think it's good for people to realize that things right now are kind of in a holding pattern, and we just have to wait and see where the data goes.
Anytime you're discussing what you think the Fed's going to be, it's always going to be an unsatisfying conclusion, in my, opinion. All right. Well, I think we've kind of beaten it to death, though. So is there anything on the to-dos list coming up for you guys?
Yeah, so we are getting ready to do a big apartment tour in Houston. So Ashley, your wife, Ashley Wilson, your wife, and I are going to be hosting an apartment tour where we're going to take 2 days in Houston in March. And we are going to do some training and some teaching and some networking. We're going to visit 3 apartment complexes that we own there. We're going to be walking through how we manage them and how we buy them. And so it's just going to be a great opportunity for people to network, to learn, and to actually get hands-on on some big multifamily properties. So for anybody that might be interested in checking that out, you can go to HoustonApartmentTour.com. That's HoustonApartmentTour.com, and you can register there. We'd love to see you in Houston.
Awesome. Great information probably coming out of that. Let's wrap this up. How would you rate the meeting?
I thought I felt a little unsatisfied with that issues discussion. Lots of good info, but we don't really have direction. So I'm going to go a little lower this week. I'm going to say an 8.62.
8.62. Yeah, I thought it was great, but you're right. That unsatisfying conclusion. I gotta rate this as an 8.0.
You pretty comfortable with that answer?
I'm pretty comfortable with that. Okay, how do you want to sign this off?
Give me a quote. Give me a good quote.
I got a great one that I thought of the other day, so back when I was playing hockey, a backup goaltender came in and he was playing, and he our starting goaltender was hurt, and he came in and he had a bunch of great games, and his stats were looking great, and we were sitting at the dinner table with a whole bunch of people, and he was throwing off all his stats, and one of the guys at the table, just dead stone face, looks him in the eye and he says, "Well, you know, statistics, they're like bikinis." And then he just had a big dramatic pause, and we're all like looking at him. He goes, "They show a lot, but they don't tell the whole story." and there was just silence, and they were like, "Oh, burn." And so anyway, I thought we were throwing out a lot of stats this week, so I thought that would be a good quote to end us on.
I like it. I like it a lot.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys sticking through all the way to the end. No book giveaway this week either, but pay attention next week. Maybe something will happen next week. I
gave away 4 books last week, by the way. So I did it for the first 4 people. So
you met your quota. Okay.
Yep.
Well, thanks everyone for joining. We will see you again next week.
Thanks, everybody.